Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 10th Carers Parliament. I'm Richard Mead, I'm the Director of Carers Scotland, and I'm going to be chairing the event today. And I will start with one apology. You may have seen that Annie Gunning-Logan was due to chair the Carers Parliament today, but she had to pull out because of her caring commitments. And she has told us how desperately sorry she is to have to miss today and hopes that you'll understand. And that we also send all of our best wishes to Annie and to thank her for her commitment to the Parliament and for all the work she has done in the build-up to and the preparation for today. So thank you, Annie. This is the first time we're back in person at the Parliament following the pandemic, but we're also welcoming people online virtually as well. So I just want to, can the tech guys at the back wave and let me know if the virtual people are in the room? Yes, so we are being watched from the comfort of many people's homes as well. We know that many people are continuing to shield from COVID and could not be here in person, but would want to be. And actually, virtual is now really convenient and flexible for a lot of people, and it allows new ways for people to participate in events like this. So we're really hoping that this new hybrid model for the Parliament works for everyone, and we'll obviously do our best to avoid any technical hiccups. We've also tried to make today's event as COVID secure as possible, and we've made available masks and sanitizers, as well as we've reduced the capacity of the in-person element of this event just to create a bit more space for people so that they feel comfortable. We would request, if you do feel comfortable and unable to do so, if you could wear a mask when you're sort of moving around the building between events and activities. Of course, if you're exempt from wearing a mask, then you don't have to. You all have the agenda with you for this morning, and it's a really exciting couple of hours. We're going to hear from a carer, we're going to hear from some young carers and see a film. The Minister has joined us, and there'll be a chance to ask some questions of a panel at the end. We've not included a formal break in the agenda because it is relatively short, but obviously please feel free to leave the room and use the facilities or take a break if you feel you need one. We have a small table at the front, just outside the door here with staff, so if you need any support or want to speak to a member of staff, then you can do. The housekeeping is here. It's quite small. I'll run through it very quickly. In short, if the alarm goes off, it's not a drill, so we should get out of here as quickly and as orderly as possible. The toilets are located just out the doors and up the stairs. Obviously the staff will be on hand in any case of any emergencies. Well, that's enough of me. We've got a really tight agenda, so I want to get through things as quickly as possible. And it's time to hear from our speakers. For the 10 years that we've had the Carers Parliament in Scotland, it has been supported by the Scottish Government. And every year, a minister has spoken and answered questions of carers and joined in the debate and discussions. And we might not have always agreed, and there may have been some really difficult questions over the years, but we've always been really grateful that the government continues to recognise and value this event and the importance of hearing directly from Scotland's carers. And today I'm really pleased to welcome Kevin Stewart, MSP, the Minister for Mental Wellbeing and Social Care. Kevin has been the Minister for Mental Wellbeing and Social Care since 21. He's been a member of the Scottish Parliament for Aberdeen Central since 2011, and in the prior administration he was the Minister for Local Government, Housing and Planning. He's from Aberdeen and he was a councillor there for 13 years, so he's steeped in lots of the issues that we are talking about and are interested in here today. I've known Kevin for at least 3 charities that I've worked for, and he has always been really interested in the work of the third sector and has been a real advocate for us. And most importantly, he is also the minister responsible and leading on the framework for the proposed National Care Service, which includes many commitments that could hopefully and potentially benefit carers. And that will no doubt come up a lot today. So we're really looking forward to hearing your contribution, Kevin, and I'll invite you up to come and say your words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and good morning, everyone. And I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you all to the 10th Carers Parliament. As Minister for Mental Wellbeing and Social Care, I've been looking forward to the first in-person Carers Parliament. Unfortunately, I know that some folk haven't managed today. Obviously, some folk are still shielding because of COVID, but also I know that the trains have not helped in that regard. But whether you're here or you're at home watching, welcome. And I also welcome the opportunity to speak directly with so many carers so I can better understand your current challenges and to ensure our future decisions address the most pressing issues. I understand that those of you here at Dynamic Earth have travelled from many places across the country, and I thank you for taking the time out of your very busy lives. I appreciate that being here today is challenging for many of you due to having to make alternative arrangements for those that you care for. And I know that many of you have had to make last-minute changes to your travel plans or switching to joining online. For those of you who are watching virtually, one of the legacies of the pandemic is the increased use of technology, which has enabled us all to be more connected. And it is encouraging to know that this hybrid Carers Parliament will bring more carers together with a huge range of caring situations and experiences. So whether you're here in person or virtually, I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you to all the carers attending and for the huge amount of support and commitment that you give to your families and friends. I recognise just how challenging things are, and I appreciate all the extra support that you have been providing to those that you care for. And I'd also like to thank Carers Scotland for organising today's event and the other carer organisations that are represented here today who work tirelessly to support carers. I notice a number of folk from young carers here. There's no zip wire today for me to go down, which is maybe a relief for the civil servants that are with me today. But thanks to you all for all of your efforts. Before I move on and talk about what is happening now and the work to improve future support for carers and those that you care for, I'd like to just take a moment to look back over the past 10 years. One of the main reasons the Carers Parliament was established back in 2012 was, as Richard rightly said, to allow you to engage with policymakers and ministers. And during this time, it has been vital for us to listen to and engage with unpaid carers. It has been your caring experiences and knowledge that has helped us to understand what has been working and, more importantly, what has not been working. And this has enabled us to work together to make some significant improvements to carers' rights and support, notably the Carers Scotland Act 2016. At the Carers Parliament in 2015, the First Minister spoke about how carers' wealth of knowledge and experience made a real difference to the development of the Carers Bill as it was at the time, through consultation and forums across the country. The Carers Act, which took effect in April 2018, put in place a system of carers' rights to make carer support more consistent and personalised to individuals' needs, to help protect carers, their health, their well-being, and to sustain caring relationships. While this has led to significant expansion of local carer support, there is very clearly more to be done. And we continue to work with carer representatives, local authorities and others through the Carers' Rights and Support Steering Group to deliver the group's agreed implementation plan to improve carer support, embed good practice and identify and address challenges and opportunities. While the Carers Act is a significant step, I know that there are still many challenges facing us. As a population, we are enjoying longer lives, and with that comes often more complex care needs. That means demand for social care and support is growing faster than our traditional services were designed for. Unfortunately, This has accelerated in the past 10 years and has been exacerbated by the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has therefore been so important to think differently about what care is, the value we place on it as a society, and how people can access the support that is right for them. And to help inform the improvements required in social care, many of you attended workshops at the 2020 Carers Parliament, which helped inform the independent review of adult social care. Carers' voices and contributions were clearly seen in the independent review's 53 recommendations, which the Scottish Government accepted. And one of those key recommendations was to create a national care service, with Scottish ministers being accountable for adult social care support, and that is one of the most significant public reforms for decades. At the last Carers Parliament, through a range of workshops, you contributed your views to our consultation on delivering the independent review's recommendations and establishing the National Care Service. The proposals were wide-ranging and focused on improving people's experiences of care by improving the way people access care, shifting to preventative, person-centred approaches, creating a new right to breaks from caring, and better complaints processes. And after considering the wealth of information received during the consultation, including from last year's Parliament, the National Care Service Scotland Bill was introduced to the Scottish Parliament in June of this year. And the bill sets out a legal framework for establishing the National Care Service. Importantly, the bill also makes changes to the Carer Scotland Act to deliver a right to personalised breaks and support for any carer who is not able to access sufficient breaks. The bill will ensure that being able to take sufficient breaks from providing care is an identified personal outcome in carers' personalised plans under the Carers Act. Where a carer is unable to take such breaks, they will have a right to that support. I understand that for too long, many carers who need breaks have been unable to access support, and that this has been exacerbated by the pandemic and temporary closure of vital services. I recognise that this can impact carers' well-being and those that they look after. The bill aims to shift the balance to enable more carers to access preventative short break support. And I also understand that many of you will be attending a workshop this afternoon to discuss aspects of this important work, including the meaning of sufficient breaks, to help us create solutions that work best for you. While the legislation is about the future, this year we have invested an additional £20.4 million for local statutory carer support, bringing the total investment in the Carers Act to £88.4 million per year. And in addition, we have expanded Easy Access short break support ahead of the legislation, with an extra £5 million for short breaks this year, on top of the annual £3 million voluntary sector short break funds. And that's enabling more carers to enjoy time away from their caring role. And to help address issues around access and the range of short breaks available for carers, we have also funded Health Improvement Scotland to conduct a landscape review of the short break sector. This is to improve our understanding of the issues facing the sector, the availability of different types of breaks, and the barriers to improvement. However, I do appreciate that there are many immediate and pressing issues for carers on top of getting a regular break. I'm very concerned about the hardship that households right across the country are facing at this moment in time. I'm particularly worried about unpaid carers who are facing what you are facing in this cost of living crisis. I understand that many more carers face higher bills and are unable to make spending adjustments due to the continual use of equipment needed for constant heating, restricted diet, and, of course, that continual use of equipment. Of course, there are many other factors at play too. To highlight and address some of these issues, we're currently finalising a national carer strategy which will set out our cross-government approach to carers' financial inclusion, including through social security policies, the Scottish Welfare Fund, action on fuel poverty, and supporting carers in employment and education. We have allocated more than £3 billion in this financial year to help households face the increased cost of living. And that includes £1 billion in providing services and financial support that's not available anywhere else in the UK. I appreciate that this is an extremely important and ongoing issue. And I would want to assure you all that the Scottish Government will continue to do everything within its powers and our finite budget to ensure people are supported as far as possible. However, most of the key policy levers are held by the UK Government, which needs to take urgent action, including uprating benefits, the benefits that it delivers in line with inflation for the next financial year. In the meantime, Social Security colleagues here continue to work with carers and stakeholders to develop a replacement for the Carers Allowance, Scottish Carers Assistant. That will work better for the people of Scotland, including additional support for people with multiple caring roles. I'm aware that through the recent consultation, carers told us about a number of things that they would like to change about the existing benefit, including the caring hours requirements, the earnings threshold, study restrictions, the overlapping benefits rule, and support at the end of a caring role after a cared-for person has passed away. I understand that Social Security colleagues are currently considering all of these points that you have made. Before I finish, I'd like to reiterate my commitment to continuing to meet with carers and carer representatives to ensure that we understand what carers' needs are. And in a few weeks, I'll be visiting frontline staff at Falkirk and Clackmannanshire Carer Centre to hear more about their experiences and priorities, as well as a number of carers accessing breaks from the Short Breaks Fund, in order, again, that we get that right as we move forward. So, once again, thank you all for coming along today, and I'd like to wish everyone an interesting and enjoyable day. I'm looking forward to hearing others' contributions this morning and taking part in the panel session later to discuss the issues carers have raised. So thank you all again for all of your efforts this year, for getting involved, for being part of shaping the future of social care here in Scotland. And I hope that we have a very productive and an enjoyable day today. Thank you, Richard. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Plenty of food for thought there, and I'm sure some of that will come up in the Q&A discussion later. If you have been watching that and you haven't put in a question for the Q&A and you've thought of something as a result of what Kevin said, then make a note to write it down, because there will be a chance to ask questions during the panel discussion. Next, I am delighted to introduce Carolyn Hunter. I'm not going to say too much because she is going to share her story, but I would like to say a massive thank you for being here today and supporting the Parliament. And also a huge thank you for all the tireless campaigning you have been doing, both on behalf of yourself and all of the carers. Thank you very much, and I invite you to come up and...
I'll just get myself organised now. I'm a bit nervous. I've never spoke about my journey from the beginning before, so bear with me if I get upset. Thanks, Kevin. That was good to hear all your feedback. That was good to listen to what you were saying. I'll hopefully be able to speak to you about it. I'd like to thank Fiona for inviting me here today to talk about my journey as a carer for my daughter Freya. So I'll just start. So I'm Carolyn Hunter. I live in Clackmannanshire with my 2 daughters and a whole team of NHS and self-directed support staff. I work as a project lead for PAMIS, a third sector charity supporting people living with PMLD and their families. I'm not here today as a PAMIS employee, I'm here today as Carolyn, Freya's mum. I also work in a voluntary capacity, being a voice for carers and people living with PMLD. I am also currently campaigning heavily about the energy crisis and how it is affecting carers and people requiring a high level of medical support at home. I'm also a mum to Scott, who's 29, Aaron, who's 24, and Katie Poppy, who's 19. And I'm also Nana to Elijah, who's 7, and Olivia, who's 5. I'm here today to talk about my journey as a mum, Nana, and unpaid carer. It's quite difficult to cram 13 years, almost 13 years into 20 minutes, so I'm just going to give you little bursts of the challenges and the positive parts of my journey. So this was Freya in her first year. So I just want to give you a little understanding of Freya's condition so that you'll be able to understand my caring role or nursing role, whatever. I've never quite figured it out. My daughter Freya is 12 years old. Although her life is very challenging at times, Freya is a very happy wee girl and loves being part of the world around her. At the age of 1, Freya became very ill in hospital and suffered a hypoxic brain injury. Freya came home from hospital after this horrific event and has suffered many obstacles in her life. Freya's blind, non-verbal, completely immobile, gastrostomy fed, oxygen dependent, saturation and heart rate monitored at all times, colonised with Pseudomonas. Freya requires frequent suction and has a very compromised airway. Freya requires 24/7, 2-to-1 nursing care, wherever she is. Freya also lives with epilepsy and requires 24/7 postural care management and chest physio. Although I am supported by the NHS and SDS staff to provide round-the-clock care, medical care at home for Freya, I'm still very much part of the care package, being referred to as a second nurse. This means that my life is very limited. I can only leave Freya's side when I have a nurse that is specifically trained with Freya to replace me. So, the impact that Freya's intensive medical needs have had on me and my other children. I've always struggled to identify as Freya's mum, having to medically invasively look after Freya. However, I didn't think I was her carer either. So, this is Azaki, and this was what replaced me when Freya was born and she was in special baby care. And this used to go into a wee incubator to keep her comfortable. And I just thought I'd show you it, because it's quite significant to me. I haven't looked at this for years, so a bit of a milestone for me in terms of trauma, dealing with trauma. What you'll see along this journey is trauma, grief, constant grief. So during Freya's first year of life, she had a few feeding and reflux complications that affected her health and development. However, these were manageable and improved over time. So as a family, we enjoyed looking after her, nurturing her and seeing her progress and becoming stronger as she reached her first birthday. However, as I mentioned earlier, Freya suffered a brain injury in hospital a week after her first birthday. Freya had to be emergency ventilated, then transferred to York Hill Children's Hospital, where she was looked after in ICU for weeks. Freya eventually breathed on her own and started to recover. Sadly, Freya would never recover to the baby that she was. So the hope of Freya thriving and growing up as my other children, older children, had grown up, became just a memory. At that time, and now even my biggest hope is that Freya survives. Fairly soon after waking up from being ventilated, it was evident, though, that Freya was going to have a very challenging life with regards to her health. So, I'll talk about my older children's ongoing grief, trauma, and the support that they needed. As my oldest son Scott would describe when he first saw Freya after being discharged home from York Hill, "This isn't my sister," he sobbed. Scott, aged 16, along with his wee sister Katie, aged 7 at the time, suffered a great deal of trauma, witnessing what happened to Freya in hospital. It has never been addressed or treated. I couldn't support them. I had to be with Freya. I was told she was going to die. In fact, I was asked by medics at one point to make the decision to let her go. It was the best option according to them. Her life would be a life of suffering and disabilities, and probably they knew that it would be a huge cost to them. Freya wanted to live. This was the point I found the strength to fight for my baby to live. Freya wanted to be here. She breathed after coming off the ventilator when no one else in that hospital thought she would. And this has always been trauma, and I've had to just park it because I had to bring Freya home and look after her and the rest of my family and work. Freya's siblings. This was to be the start of my transition from mum to unpaid carer, but I didn't realise it. I really found it difficult to accept that my Freya would never get better. I spent countless days, weeks and even months in hospital up until Freya was around 5 years old. Medics, nurses, the NHS made so many mistakes during those early years of Freya's life, causing Freya and the rest of my family so much trauma and suffering. All the while, during those years, I could never identify myself as Freya's carer, despite the restrictions into my life and my older children's life, whilst I was constantly providing such a high level of intense medical care. I was more like Freya's nurse, and I had to detach myself emotionally from Freya because I was providing her with medical care that a nurse would provide in terms of putting buttons in and suctioning tubes down her throat and just all these really, really invasive procedures. You can't do that to somebody that you love and it's okay. So I had to kind of detach myself. So soon after discharge from hospital, I was to be given priority for having a complex care package from the NHS Forth Valley. I also had DP hours allocated to me, direct payment hours. I didn't even have to ask. I hear so many people having to fight for a care package. A tiny number of hours even to give them much needed support to exist, not even just to live, just to exist. But I got it. I didn't even have to ask. I got used to the support. However, Freya's condition was so intense at times I began to think I didn't have enough support. My older children needed me too. Scott was sitting his hires at school. Aaron was going into his 4th year at high school, and Katie was just a wee bairn who needed her mum. Sadly, I wasn't given the support I needed in those early years of all my children's lives, and life was so chronically difficult for everyone. My older children didn't want to be identified as young carers. They just wanted their mum. I remember having a chat with a community nurse, and she suggested that I seek support for my older children with a carer centre. I didn't even know what a carer centre was. I just didn't know about any of these things because I was so intensively looking after Freya in the hospital all the time and angry. I didn't want help. I didn't want that kind of help. I explored the option, however. As I expected, Scott was not interested, and Katie and Aaron I've not got time to go into detail, but it was challenging. But I managed it because I needed my job. It was about me. It was really expensive as well. It cost me more than double the amount I used to pay a childminder to look after my older children. So I didn't really earn much money, but it was the fact I still had my job, and that meant a lot to me. My employer was very empathetic to my home life. I was given trauma counselling. I'd went through a lot of trauma and they understood that. Flexible working hours, paid parental leave. Sometimes up to 4 months I would be off because Freya would be in intensive care and I needed to be with her and mother children. And they just had complete empathy and understanding of my situation. I suppose they would be called a carer positive employer now, because that was a while ago. My work was such an important part of my life. So, my non-dependent children are not social work's problem either. So don't ask for any support or help when you need to. During 2014, I had a car accident on the way home from work. I had to take time off to work to recover whilst getting treatment. However, during that leave, Freya became really ill to the extent she was given last resort oscillator ventilation at Edinburgh Sick Kids and wasn't expected to survive. During that time of Freya's ventilation, my oldest son was then diagnosed with testicular cancer. The same week, my oldest grandson, Elijah, was expected to arrive. It was a tough few weeks. I attended hospitals all over central Scotland, looking after my sick children and waiting for my grandson to be born, whilst trying to support my well children at home too. Chas were very supportive during this time, thankfully. They even came over to I think Scott was at the Beatson, and they came over to support me at that time at the Beatson with Scott, although he was an adult. I also had really good friends at home that could support my well children. Thankfully, Freya recovered well from that episode. Elijah was born healthy, and Scott was able to start treatment after surgery. I remember after getting home with Freya, I crashed in a heap. I was also in the process of trying to find a suitable house, or my care package was going to be taken away from me, and Freya would have ended up in residential care. So the reason for that was that my property didn't have any room for hoisting facilities, and basically Freya lived in a little dining room off my living room, and there was no room, and Freya couldn't have a bath. The bath was upstairs and she was getting too big. So appropriate housing was it was a fight. I was eventually housed in spring 2015 with a home sourced by Clacks Council that would suit my family's needs, or at least that was the intention. I'm now facing further disruption to our lives with regards to housing due to the energy crisis, and I'll talk about that later on. So Scott, aged 21 at the time, had to go through months of chemotherapy in hospital in Edinburgh. Scott lived in Edinburgh at the time with his wee family. Scott and his partner Lee, wife now, were not able to drive, so I wanted to support them by taking Scott to his chemotherapy treatment with my son. I asked social work and health if they would provide me with more respite hours to replace me at home with Freya, so I could drive over to Edinburgh once a week to take Scott for his treatment. Lee was a new mum looking after their new baby Elijah, my grandson, so it was really tough for her. Let's not forget this was trauma for them. They didn't know the outcome. I was told by social work that Scott was no longer a dependent, so he had to get on with it himself. This was devastating to me. I fought it, and health gave me extra hours a week respite to care for my son who was fighting cancer. Once I moved into the new home we currently live in, I had lots of problems started to arise with the property. It was a living hell. As time went on, it became apparent that I needed to employ another member of staff to support Freya whilst I was working. I knew that this was unaffordable for me, so I asked social work if they would provide me with respite hours that I could use to employ a nurse to support my nanny to look after Freya. The response from social work was that Clacks Council do not offer a free childcare service. So at that point, I felt that my life didn't matter. All I wanted was to continue to work, continue to have a part of me that was important to me. It was hard work getting to that stage that I was at in my career, with all the challenges I had in my life, but I was still there. I was losing my future security. Everything I had worked so hard for years, gone. I really didn't like that social worker. In fact, I don't like many of them. They're in control of my life and they do what they want with it. So I gave up my career. It was horrific. So I was now an unpaid carer. And I'd never identified myself as an unpaid carer. I don't know what I was because I was so many different roles with Freya. And what did it mean? What did this mean? Exactly what it says. I was never given enough support to support my older children who needed me to nurture them through school. Shortly after I gave up work, Scott had to have major surgery. The cancer had spread. It was tough times again. Freya thankfully was reasonably stable. Aaron was struggling with school. I didn't have energy to fight for him, and I regret that. Katie was just getting on with school. I didn't have much energy to notice how she was doing either. We got by though. Aaron and Katie never wanted to make life harder for me, so they just plodded along. Is that okay? How's that okay? I needed more support. I screamed out loud for it, but I wasn't heard. Scott got through his surgery, thankfully. I felt so angry that I was not supported to continue to work and still care for Freya at the same time. So in winter 2015, I contacted Heather Noller at the Carers Trust and asked if I could join the Carers cross-party group meetings, as Heather was the convener, I think, at the time, with, I think it was Joan McAlpine, who does keep in touch with me, and has commented about our journey a few times. And I was invited along at the time of the kind of consultations supporting the Carers Act, the development of the Carers Act 2016. I remember at my first meeting, I was nervous to speak out about my lived experience. I didn't feel that what I had to say was important. However, I did it, and after the first speech, there was no stopping me. I joined the Disabilities and Palliative Care cross-party group meetings too, and I became involved in various research projects off the back of these meetings. This was from speaking about our life. I remember presenting about Freya's journey of life in the Disabilities cross-party group meeting in 2016. I spoke passionately about Freya's postural care journey from the age of 2 and how it had improved her quality of life with the hope of giving her a longer life with less pain and supporting her to be able to breathe more easily with better positioning. I spoke also about a model of lifelong learning that I hoped would be in place by the time Freya transitioned into adult services. So there's our National Care Service that's hopefully going to make this transition good. Freya was 6 at the time of this presentation. Straight after the presentation, Jenny Miller, CEO of PAMIS, came over to me and asked me to join her for a coffee to talk about Freya's journey, our life and our dreams. This was to be the start of me feeling valued and on a positive pathway for me to travel on. So the start of my journey into meaningful employment, I continued to attend cross-party group meetings and started volunteering with PAMIS. I loved being part of an organisation. I had a purpose. I was able to influence positive change, not just for me, but for other people too. Although I wasn't in paid employment, I felt like I was working. It was good for my mental health and well-being. Then we had the happy news from Scott and Lee of another baby on the way. Just as Livia was about to be born, Scott had the bad news his cancer had spread again. Scott had to go through more surgery. I wanted to support my son and his family. This time I was given support for Freya, so I could support my son and his family through his surgery and the birth of Olivia. I didn't even have to really shout about it. I don't understand why social work think that Scott and his family are not my responsibility. I'm his mum, and I wanted to support him and his family through difficult times in their lives. How dare they make me choose which child to support the most? All of my children needed me at that time. I just needed to support them all. This was trauma. I still have trauma reaction when I think about these times, so I try not to think about it. Olivia was born healthy. Scott got through his second major surgery. He is yearly checked now. I pray him and his family never have to go through that again. I continue to volunteer as a voice for carers and people living with PMLD through cross-party groups, PAMIS and research projects. I even attended the famous Partners in Policy Making course in 2016 to 2017. I was supported by Chas to attend their sessions. It was good to meet so many like-minded people. I have managed to keep in touch with some people over the years, and a few are now my good friends. If I went too far. So towards the end of 2018, after learning about policy and the Carers Act at Scottish Government level, I agreed to become a carer rep for Alloa and Falkirk. I think it's Clackmannanshire and Falkirk, actually, Carer Centre, attending Clacks and Stirling Health and Social Care Partnership, IGB, and carers planning meetings. I wanted to learn more about what was going on locally with carers. I did find it difficult at first because the Carers Act had clearly not even been started to be implemented in my area. I wasn't really impressed about that. So I did quite a lot of work with the Health and Social Care Partnership, and I think some of the things I spoke about, there was change, in a sort of group. Changes happen, so positive changes happen. So I feel quite good that happened. I was able to help make that happen. I loved volunteering with PAMIS as well, and in June 2019, Freya and I were involved in a research project play about inclusion and accessibility in our community society. This was in a Scottish Government building, Victoria Quay, and it was really good, yeah. Very positive play. Freya attended as well, and I felt like I had a purpose again, being part of all these projects. In summer 2019, I decided to go on to a postural care course that PAMIS run for family carers and AHP practitioners. Although I provided Freya with postural care as a routine care, I learned a lot from the course, and I thought, I'd really like to do this. I'd like to train people because I was so passionate about the journey that Freya and I had been on. So I went on to do the Train the Trainer course with Nez, and this course would give me the skills and accreditation to become a trainer. I wasn't sure how I would manage working and looking after Freya, but I guess I thought I would cross that bridge, fight the fight and make it happen. After all, that's what my life had become. And I was getting kind of used to it. So I attended my first Carers Parliament in 2019, and actually I might have been at another one, but I can't remember because maybe 3 years prior to that. I attended, so I spoke about unpaid carers not being supported to work or access education. I remember being emotional when I spoke, and I just want to thank you, Fiona, for supporting me through my emotions at that time. In late 2019, I became involved in developing the postural care strategy with PAMIS. I had been providing Freya with postural care since she was 2, so I felt I had the lived experience, knowledge to provide expert advice, and at the same time, this was another step helping me to gain the confidence to get back into employment, because that was something that really mattered to me. And that, yeah, so in terms of the Carers Act, it's about, for me, it's about what stands out is about the Carers Act is supporting carers to lead a meaningful life alongside caring for their loved ones. So that's what I wanted to do. That was my dream. I had dreams, so I thought, how am I going to reach my dreams? And being in employment was going to be the way I would do it. So I delivered my first postural care training session in Dundee in February 2020. I remember getting up early in the morning to catch the train. I put a nice dress on, did my makeup, which I never used to bother about, blow-dried my hair, I never blow-dry my hair, and got in my car. Listened to some radio on the way, parked up at the station, caught the train. All I could feel was a sense of, wow, I'm going to work. I'm needed for something other than looking after my children. I am carolling today. So what I have to say is positive, and also what I have to say is positively changing other people's lives. It was a nice feeling, and I felt happy and perhaps contented for the first time in a long time. So, the pandemic. During the first year of the pandemic, I managed to cope okay. Yes, I had the fear of how it could affect my loved ones, especially Freya, with her being a high-risk shielder, and Scott with having had cancer. I also worried about my mum, as she lives on her own in Yorkshire. She became really ill mentally, which meant I became her carer from 250 miles away. I had to liaise with NHS England, GPs, mental health teams, social workers and crisis teams. It was a bit like what I do here, but it was just from a distance. It was a tough time. I did my best. My mum is okay now. They misdiagnosed. She had broken toes all along. Anyway, it's a long story, and I'll deal with that at some point in my life. During the first year of the pandemic, I managed to look after my own mental health and well-being by continuing with art. You can see some of the pictures that I've painted. And that's my mum in the corner. So I continued with that. I had picked painting up the year before the pandemic, loving my art classes when life was difficult at home. Some of my paintings were not too bad. Well, I thought so. I loved the whole process of losing myself in the few hours of creating that masterpiece. I also saved up for a year and bought myself an electric bike so I could effortlessly get out into the fresh air and countryside. It was my ways of coping. During the first year of the pandemic, though, I also got myself into growing vegetables in my garden, just like everybody else, I think, and baking cakes. And we all made bread. I also decluttered my home. I think everybody did that as well, selling old clothes on eBay. That was fun. In year 2 of COVID, I started to feel low, and I had a lot of staffing issues. Leaving at one point myself and a member of staff to do a 36-hour shift with Freya, when at that time I had an infection and was not fit to look after Freya. It was horrific. I will never forget how vulnerable we were left and how unsupported health and social care made us feel. After that incident, another staff member called in sick. I remember pleading with a senior NHS care provider to find a replacement to support me to look after Freya and keep her safe at home. I was physically and mentally exhausted. A remark was made to me, "I'm trying to make your life bearable." Those words had devastating consequences with regards to the way I felt about my place in the world. It was a build-up. That was just the final straw. It tipped me over the edge. I had thoughts of not wanting to live anymore. My life was of no value. This is how insignificant my life was, perceived by the people who had been controlling my life since just after Freya's first birthday. However, I was supported back to better mental health by those in my life who love and value me, thankfully. Shortly after this event, I was convinced by a senior member of the Health and Social Care Partnership that I should have an adult carer support plan done by my local carer centre. I remember thinking, what's the point? A social worker a few years before had told me an adult care support plan would not trigger anything. It would just be a document that would just be filed away, and that's it. That's what they said to me, so that was in my head. I knew this wasn't what should happen, but, anyway, I decided to get it done. I was completely honest about the impact of the intensity of caring for Freya was having on my physical, mental and emotional health. And that was hard to have that conversation, because it kind of makes it look as if you can't cope with your life. And a lot of people don't want to admit that. I didn't want to, because everybody thinks I can do everything, and, But anyway, I explained that my life was just in existence, and it was. I felt like that. That's how I felt. I did have dreams, but they were never going to be reachable. All I wanted to do was live a meaningful life and care for Freya and the rest of my children at the same time. Was that so much to ask? I wanted to get back into employment. That meant so much to me. I had started on a pathway before the pandemic. I was learning to deliver postural care training so that I would one day be able to deliver this training across Scotland to NHS practitioners, carers, people with movement difficulties and paid carers. How was this ever going to happen? I was Freya's main carer, unable to leave her side unless I was replaced. I remember getting a call from Freya's social worker shortly after the adult carer support plan was submitted. I was given some hours to replace me. It was groundbreaking for me. It meant that once Freya returned to school after the pandemic, I could work during school hours and after, if need be, I could make plans about my life. I had volunteered with PAMIS for almost 6 years and started learning how to deliver postural care training. I knew that PAMIS would be a carer-positive employer, so I applied for the job as Postural Care Education Lead in autumn 2021. I had looked at the job description and realised that although I hadn't been in employment since 2015, and I was a software engineer then, I had so many of the skills required to be able to do the job through my role as Freya's carer, nurse, mum, whatever I was. I just didn't have them accredited and written on my CV. I started to realise that being a carer was a job, a very meaningful job, and the skills that we gain from our caring role are phenomenal. We really just need to tease them out and think about how we can match them to a job that we really maybe want to do. Or think about a job and, I think for me it's about, I never really knew what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to go back to IT, but that was my past. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but when I started to think about what skills I had, wow. So I was interviewed for the job 1 year ago, just now. I started working with PAMIS last year on the 22nd of November, the day after Freya's 12th birthday. Straight away, I began to feel valued, part of a team, happy, contented, being able to maybe reach my dreams one day. My life was more balanced looking after Freya. Freya's staff were constantly remarking about how well and happy I looked, and they were happy about that. They wanted to see me happy because they were in my house all the time. They're in my house. They're who I live with. So, bang, the energy crisis. In March this year, my friend Fiona, who lives in London, came up to Stirling to stay in her holiday flat near the castle and invited me over to show me how to make a patchwork cushion. And I thought I'd just bring it along because I was really proud of it. Never done one before. It was a really, really nice evening. I cooked us dinner from scratch, a nice curry. It was beautiful. And it was our first proper catch-up since before the pandemic. It was lovely, and I was in a good place mentally with lots to talk about with having my new job. I remember going to my bed and reading my emails before I fell asleep, which is what I always do. So I opened an email from Scottish Power. This was to be the start of our energy crisis and more sleepless nights. The email stated that we would be paying £855 a month for my gas and electricity. I had already struggled with my bills historically due to the amount of high usage for Freya's medical equipment, but this was devastation. My house was also not energy efficient. It's an old property, so it's very unenergy efficient. So that's why, it wasn't, the bills are high. My initial thoughts were, if this is the case, Freya would need to go into care and I would need to move out of our house until a more energy efficient home was sought for us. This wasn't an option. Freya wouldn't survive in residential or hospital without the good proactive care and love we provide for her at home. It was really distressing. So, Twitter. I tweeted the energy bill, highlighting the serious situation for mine and other families living with similar circumstances. I was approached by many journalists and news reporters for TV and radio. So since March, I've continually campaigned through social media, TV, radio, newspapers and politicians to make the Scottish and UK government aware of the dangerous situation our families are living in with the energy and cost of living crisis. It's hard because I'm working, I'm looking after Freya, and I'm tired, I'm exhausted. But I'm going to keep going because I need to. It's hard though, and I'm tired, and I need to paint a picture. I need to do something for myself, and I think that's important for everybody in this room, carers. We have such a busy life, but we need to take time out for ourselves, and I'm not doing that at the moment, so I need to start doing that. It's good being away actually for this. I'm away for 2 nights, probably. And it's nice just to get a break. So I wish I'd brought my paints, but hey. So a few weeks ago, I did a BBC Live radio interview on Good Morning Scotland. I'd had a couple hours sleep because I'd just came back from my son's wedding abroad, and it was so exhausting, but I did it. This then became the top news online with BBC, which then enabled politicians to raise Freya's case as a question at FMQs. On that day, First Minister committed to appropriately supporting our health vulnerable families. I've also had her case reviewed in a committee in the UK Parliament in partnership with Disability Rights UK, and I'm also hoping that it will be raised again. That's hopefully in the pipeline. I was on the news yesterday as well, that had been recorded a couple of weeks ago, talking about it with Ian Hamilton. And I'm doing another radio interview on Friday. But these are all, journalists want to speak to me all the time. It's tiring. And going through the story over and over again is emotionally draining. I continue to attend carers roundtable meetings with regards to the cost of living crisis as well, discussing ways in which we can make sure appropriate support happens. So hopefully we'll be listened to and things will change and become more positive around the energy crisis. I think there's a budget in a few weeks, so we'll see what happens there. No doubt I'll be called upon to give my point of view. So, my family today. So, Scott and Lee got married a few weeks ago in Crete. I was able to go. Freya's dad looked after Freya with the team, nurses, at home, but he missed his son's wedding. Two of us couldn't be out of the country at the same time. So I'm very thankful that he was able to do that. And my grandchildren, they're just amazing. So Scott's just finished university, his degree in chemistry and pharmaceutical chemistry. And he's currently working in Wren's Kitchens as a kitchen designer just now until he decides what he wants to do. Aaron's a kitchen designer with Wren's as well, and he's quite happy. And Katie Poppy, she's at university studying English and French in their second year. And that's my wee dogs. They keep us going. And Freya, she continues to be a voice to make positive change through me. So yeah, hard life, hard journey, but I'm proud. I'm proud of all my children and what they went through. And there are times when they talk about the past, and it's hard, and it's hard. But you know, look, we're getting there. So, there's Freya. She likes her music. Today I spoke about the impact that Freya's intense medical needs have had on me and my older children over the years, and I think a lot of people can resonate with me with that, and struggling to identify as Freya's mum, having to medically invasively look after her since the age of 1. However, I don't think of myself as being a carer either, just more like a nurse. I'd like to be her mum though. That's something that hopefully one day I'll be able to just be Freya's mum. Mine and my older children's ongoing chronic grief and trauma, and what support we needed and we still haven't really been offered. And like I said, it comes out sometimes. We have discussions and these traumatic events. I'm getting better though. I can go to places that events happened and I don't have the trigger. The triggers. I'm getting better with things. Not as angry, but I think it's because I've moved on. I've got a job now, and I'm supported. We're supported as a family, and my children are all doing okay. They're doing good. So moving on helps that process of recovery. Social work's attitude. There's a lot of work needs to be done around social work. Sorry if there's some social workers here, but really, that's been a difficult journey with me for me with social workers. And I think it's training, it's, trauma-informed, being aware of people's trauma, ongoing trauma. Housing's a nightmare. We need to think about housing. And I think that should be part of the National Care Service consultations as well. Just everything needs to be brought into, everything needs to be thought about, and how do we make it work, and how enable people to have meaningful lives in their community. The Carers Act. What does this mean? And it's not been implemented properly. It's there, but and I wasn't comfortable about opening up about how I felt. So I think it's about maybe enabling people to have that space and safety, and make sure that people are fine about that. Having those conversations, and it's about who you're having that conversation with. Lack of support into meaningful employment. That's one of my biggest passions, is to help and support people. That's one of my projects with PAMIS, is to support people into meaningful employment, because I've done it. It's been hard. It was a hard journey. I've not even gone into what I had to go through, but that's about making this a possibility and an option for people. And just a lack of empathy and understanding from service providers, that needs to be more looked at. So just to round up, I just want to round up by showing, I've showed you this slide. And just, these are the challenges that I've faced in the past 12, 13 years, whatever, as Freya's carer, Freya's mum, nurse. I'm sure most of you can resonate with some of the challenges that I've faced. As I've explained, it's really traumatic, grief-stricken, hard, selfless, lonely journey being a carer. And I would like to ask the Scottish Government to think about how they can support carers more appropriately to enable us to live meaningful lives alongside caring for our loved ones. Isn't that what the Carers Act states? After all, without us, your NHS and social care would completely collapse, leaving the taxpayer to pay around £100,000 a year per carer to replace us. This is data that I read research that was carried out by the Fraser Valander Institute in 2021, looking at people who are supported with learning disabilities. So I just want to say, and I said it on STV News last year, when I came into employment, I was interviewed by Laura Alderman, and I said, I'm important, you're important, we are a workforce, we're the future workforce, we are the National Care Service, and please can you value us? That's all I ask. We're the experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was really powerful and so much to learn and understand for all of us. And I would say Freya's got excellent taste in music as well. I love John Williams, and the Raiders March from Indiana Jones is one of my personal favourites, so great choice. Now we're going to hear from a group of young carers, the Media Ambassadors. The Media Ambassadors are a group of 8 young carers, aged 16 to 18 from across Scotland. And over the summer, they participated in a filmmaking training course and captured footage at the recent Scottish Young Carers Festival. And today they're launching their final film, and they're going to discuss important themes and how they would like the film to influence change. I think we're going to see the film first, and then hand over to some of the young carers from the Media Ambassadors to do a presentation. So I don't know if it's me that gets to do it.
I can speak first.
Oh yeah, of course you can. Come on up.
Hello, we are part of the Media Ambassadors, also known as Tragic Amigos. We are here today to tell you a bit about ourselves and the film we have created, and to discuss some of the themes to come out of this.
In July, 8 young carers aged 16 to 18 from across Scotland came together as the media ambassadors. As a group, we took part in filmmaking training with media education and planned a film to raise awareness of young carers. We decided in 2022 to focus our film on the theme of respite and short breaks for young carers. This was an important theme for us as young carers have struggled to take a break, particularly in the past 2 years, and the right to a break is being discussed under our National Care Service. We attended the Scottish Young Carers Festival in July-August 2022, where we spoke to lots of young carers like ourselves on how they think respite is important and what they do to take a break from their caring role.
I am a young carer for mainly my siblings and my mother.
I've been a young carer for 6.5 years.
And I care for my dad and my younger brother.
It can be overwhelming for some people.
So having a little time for myself is just, it's great.
Welcome to the Scottish Young Carers Festival. The festival has had thousands of young carers attend over the last 15 years.
This is its first festival in person since 2019. The festival allows young carers to get respite from their caring role, allowing them to take part in a variety of different activities only the festival can offer.
The festival doesn't only allow young carers to get respite from their caring role, but also allows them to make friends in the same situation, which will last them a lifetime.
Tragic Amigos are a group of young carers from around Scotland who have come together to create a short film about the Young Carers Festival and to discuss the importance of respite.
I think the festival is important because we get a 3-day break.
If not, then people would get very overwhelmed and people wouldn't be able to stay happy as long.
It just affects everybody around about you and the people you're caring. So, going de-stressing and going back just makes everything a whole lot better and easier for everybody, especially yourself.
If you don't have that, then you just feel like you're swamped with everything and it all just becomes like one big pile of mess.
It's a good break away from just kind of a lot of responsibilities. I mean, I'm 17 years old, jumping on bouncy castles and stuff, like having the time of my life. So I think it's important just, for having a bit of fun.
It's important because you'll get annoyed at people if you don't have a break.
They have to juggle so many different things in their lives. We've got caring responsibilities, which will look different depending on your caring role. And then on top of that, as a young person, you also have school or college or university, and trying to manage all that can be a lot, especially when you've got caring responsibilities. So it's really important that you have time for yourself and time to do things that you enjoy.
I just tend to go out, play football, spend time with my granny and go out with my friends.
Mostly go ice skating, do figure skating mostly.
I like to go on motocross races.
When I was a carer, full-time carer, coming to the festival was a great respite for me, 100%, just for clearing your mind, getting your own time.
Because of my caring role, it's quite intensive, so there have been times I've not been able to go on school trips, or even small things like going out with my friends. I've just not had the chance to do them.
It does get in the way of things that I want to do, but I'm happy that I'm helping someone.
We need to listen to you guys to hear what has been difficult for you, what we need to get right. And it's part of those conversations that have led to the changes that we're making and putting short-term breaks into law as part of the National Care Service Bill. And that's what we have to continue to do to make things better as we move on.
I think it's been amazing.
I am really enjoying the festival, and it's really good because you get to meet other young carers and you get to discuss what's happening with your life.
We hope you enjoy this film, and we hope that it can help us to improve the difficult situation that we as young carers go through on a daily basis.
Thank you so much for watching and listening. Lots of love, the Tragic Amigos. We hope you enjoyed our film. As you can see, breaks from caring look different to everyone, and they're so important to young carers, especially as it allows them to be young people. Some of the themes to come out of this film are highlighted further for the consultation at the festival. This event is a great opportunity for young carers to tell us what it is like being a young carer in Scotland today. We're going to do an interactive element about where we have you guess some of our consultation findings. So if you just put your hands up when I say, what percentage of young carers that you spoke to do you think feel as though they can't take a break from their caring role when they need it? Hands up, 24%. Hands up, 12%. The answer is 24% of young carers don't feel like they can take a break.
What percentage of young carers that we spoke to do you think don't understand their rights around getting a break as a young carer? Hands up, 27%. Hands up, 39%. The answer is 39% don't understand their rights around getting a break.
As you can see from this video, every young carer feels they need and deserve a break. Most young carers said that the Scottish Young Carers Festival was a chance for them to get that break and make friends in the same situation as them all around Scotland. We asked young carers how they feel about accessing respite and any barriers they face. The reason why most young carers we spoke to feel as though they can't take a break is down to feeling selfish or guilty. Other barriers include unreliable transport, especially if you live in a rural area, lack of replacement care, costs, particularly during the cost of living crisis where breaks are not as big a priority, and poor access to mental health care.
So while we come together today and celebrate the last 10 years and what Scotland has achieved for young carers, including the Carers Scotland Act offering young carers the Young Carer Statement, initiatives such as Young Scots Young Carers Package and Young Carer Grant offering young carers opportunities to access new hobbies or treats, or even introduction of free bus travel for under 22s, and the positive impact this is having on young carers, we cannot sit back.
Our work at the festival this year shows that young carers still need support and the barriers they face in accessing a break must be broken down further. We also know that while the Scottish Government estimate there are 30,000 young carers in Scotland, Carers Trust research suggests that this figure is much higher, estimating that 1 in 5 in every classroom has some level of a caring role, bringing the total over 100,000 in Scotland. It is therefore important that we continue to raise awareness so our peers can get the help they need, whether that be in schools, colleges, at our GPs or pharmacies. We hope that our film will begin these conversations and continue to raise awareness of young carers.
We just want to end our presentation by saying thank you for letting us use this platform to launch our film. This is just the beginning and we plan to keep pushing for greater support for young carers in Scotland. To decision makers here today, while we celebrate the past 10 years and look forward to the future, including welcoming the right to a break for unpaid carers, it is important that decision makers continue to work with and listen to young carers about how that support will work in reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a brilliant film, really. And actually, some of the stats you shared there were really telling. And I can see the ministers coming over to speak to you now. So obviously, urgent action hopefully being taken. We're now going to move to the Q&A panel. We have got Carolyn will join us back on the stage along with the minister. And we're also going to be joined by Councillor Paul Kelly from COSLA. COSLA is the umbrella body for the Scottish local authorities, and Paul is COSLA's health and care spokesperson. He's been hugely interested in the issue of carers since he's taken on that role, and he actually invited me and Carers Scotland to speak at the very first Health and Social Care Board meeting, which was really welcome that COSLA has such a huge commitment in the issue of carers, so welcome, Paul. And I'd like to invite Raymond Jameson up as well, the Carer Centre Manager for Perth and Kinross. Raymond was a young carer himself and has been involved in the Carer Centre, I think, for 15 years, including the last 7 years as manager, so great experience. I'm just going to put, the Minister does have to leave at about 12:15, I think, to go to another government meeting, so he will get down from the stage in the middle of the Q&A. It's nothing you've said, it's something that he has to do, so, but we'll continue through till lunch. We have been given a whole range of questions to ask the panel. Some have been sent in beforehand, and some have been from people here in this room today, and I will call on a few of those people if they're here to ask their question. We've also got some questions from our virtual audience, and Kate here is going to help me with some of the virtual questions that come in throughout the session. And if you haven't put in a question already, but I've thought of something as a result of what we've heard this morning, then I will give people a chance in the room to ask a question. And I have my list of questions. And is Patricia Walsh here? I think, no, Patricia is not. Well, and I'll ask Patricia's question for her because I think it was a really good one. And it's probably a good one for the Minister, particularly to start on, because it came up. And that is the particular focus on the carers strategy. And what can we expect from the Carers strategy, and how will that truly deliver on the promise of things like the Carers Act and for carers?
Thank you very much. It is a very good question. And first of all, I should say I went and spoke to the girls after seeing the video there. I'm quite embarrassed, actually. I've got the same suit and tie on as I had in that video. Folk will be thinking I've only got one. As I said earlier in the speech, we'll be publishing very shortly a new national carer strategy, which will set out the cross-government approach to carers issues, including through the likes of social security and social care policies. But also, I think Carolyn highlighted this to a huge degree, and from my own perspective, some of the carers that I know, including folk that I've employed myself, we have to do better in terms of employment and education, and make it much easier for people to do what they want to do in these regards, because why should anyone really have to give up work if that's what they want to do? So that's an area where I think we have to have a lot more thinking, and also make it easier to actually allow folk to do what they want. And I think we've moved on a great deal in terms of carer-aware employers, but we have got a lot further to go. And I think some of the other things which, again, have been highlighted by Carolyn this morning, but by others in recent times to me, and it harks back to my old job in government as Housing Minister, is how do we ensure that the housing stock that we have meets the needs of people? Now, we've made changes around about building standards to ensure that, you know, it should not be as difficult in future to get a hoist in to a house. But, you know, it's quite difficult when it comes to older homes, as obviously you have and others have faced, Carolyn. So a range of things we need to look at. It has to be cross-governmental. You have to continue to tell us what works and what doesn't work, and we need to do our level best to continue that improvement as we go forward.
Thanks, Kevin. Paul, what's COSLA's view of the upcoming carers strategy? What do you want to see? How do you think it's going to work in local authorities?
Thank you, Richard. And just to say, delighted to be here today and to take part in this event on behalf of COSLA, on behalf of local government, local councils, and thank you very much for the invitation. Also, just to touch on Carolyn's story, which was extremely powerful and I think really useful for people like myself and the Minister to hear on a regular basis the reality and the journey and the struggles and your fight and you and Freya and your family, and it's really very powerful, and there's a lot to take away and a lot we still need to do, so thank you for that. And to the Tragic Amigos, that was a really excellent presentation and great media skills as well to bring it all together, and it was great to see how successful the event was as well, and you've put it all together and some of the issues we face, so thank you for that. In terms of the carer strategy, what we would say is local government is absolutely committed to doing everything we can to support carers and to work with government on the carer strategy. We had it come up at our Health and Social Care Board, which was represented by all the 32 councils in Scotland last week, and there was a lot of discussion on the issues around the strategy from councillors. There's a huge amount of interest, a huge amount of awareness of the issues that are faced in communities and carers face. And what we would like to see is, as part of this carer strategy, is to make sure these things are fully funded. I mean, we can have strategies and we can have initiatives, but if they're not funded properly, then that's where, I know everybody in this room is carers, we're involved with carers, that's where we can fall down. So we have to make sure the strategies are fully funded and to get that support in place for carers as we go forward.
Thanks. And Raymond, what from the perspective of the Carers Centre do you want to see and hope that the Carers strategy will deliver?
I think there will be challenges. Obviously, there's 32 local carer strategies across Scotland, and now going to have an overarching carer strategy which may not be in line with what existing local strategies say. I think one thing I would say is if a national carer strategy is introduced, and the Minister had mentioned previously, and it is without doubt that since the Carers Act was introduced in 2018, the funding that has been awarded through the Carers Act has increased year on year to 88.4 million this year. But that money was never ring-fenced for carer services. And I think if you were to ask 90% of the carer centre network across Scotland, the question that many of them would ask is, where's the Carers Act money being spent? So I guess the ask would be, if it's an additional investment within this national carer strategy that's going to be introduced, could that money be ring-fenced? So it's some reassurance, I guess, to yourself as well as ministers that that money is getting spent in the places where it's meant to be.
Kevin, do you want to respond to that?
I think there's always a difficulty with ring fencing, and Paul sitting next to me would disagree with me completely and utterly if we move to ring fencing. However, you know, I've been made very well aware in certain parts of the country that the money that we have given to local authorities definitely has not reached carers. And I think that between us, central government and local government must ensure that every penny that goes for these services is actually spent on carers and carer centres.
Paul, is there anything you want to add to that on the local government perspective? I mean, I know you can't answer for every local authority, but...
No, absolutely, and I think, you know, it's not actually about whether things are ring-fenced or not, it's making sure that money goes directly to carers to use. But I have to be honest, local authorities have faced significant budget cuts over the last 10 years. These are substantial budget cuts. That means the choices are really, really difficult, and the pressures that come on the system are really, really difficult. So our challenge back to government is you need to properly fund local authorities so that we can implement the actions we want to take properly. So I think that's the balance we have to get. And in terms of, we're talking about the National Care Service, and we'll go on to it, you know, there is significant issues around how that would be properly funded, etc. So we're absolutely committed to supporting carers, to supporting the carer strategy, but we also want to be upfront and honest about the funding challenges that local authorities face, and they've tried to protect social care as best they can, but as Carolyn indicated earlier, just some of the challenges that are still being faced and we're aware of that need to change.
Thank you. Richard, could I just say on that point that there's £10.8 billion saving to the economy that unpaid carers make year on year. So if 10% of carers down tools and said, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm not willing, able, as the Carers Act says, to do this anymore, you know, that's going to make a huge difference to...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's about being proactive and not reactive. It's about putting in place support measures now to make sure that we don't get to that position where carers are saying... We had a situation at my carer centre on Friday about 4 o'clock. We had a single parent of 3 phone, had 17 pence in her bank account and had no food in the cupboards. And she phoned us, as you can imagine. And we'd supported her previously to get all the other benefits she's entitled to through welfare rights, through crisis loans and all the rest of it. But it's undoubtedly that carer situation in the next 6 months isn't going to improve. It's probably going to deteriorate, and she's going to contact us again to see, can we help? And how can we as a carer centre network say no? But we don't have the financial resources to continue to support this, and that's why I'm talking about ring fencing the money, just to make sure that it gets spent where it's meant to get spent. And I appreciate the Minister's comments and hope that is the way forward, but from past experience it's not been what's been happening.
So I hear loud and clear what folk are saying here around about ring fencing, and it may be an idea to ask the audience what they think about that.
Well, good question. Audience, what do we think? Gentlemen, I have someone with a roving mic, Rena and Rhonda.
Morning. I've been on Shetland Integrated Joint Board for coming up for 5 years now, right? And ever since the Carers Act came out, I have been asking, where does the money go, right? And so far, I've got no answers, right? They cannot tell me where the money is going. It just ends up going to adult social services, it ends up going here, there and everywhere, and gets lost.
So you serve in an IJB, sir, and they kind of tell you where that money goes?
Correct.
That's interesting. Okay.
Right.
What's your name, please?
Jim Guyan.
Sorry?
Jim Guyan.
Jim Guyan.
Right.
Guyan.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Anybody else want anything to say particularly about ring-fence funding and local authority support, particularly at that care centre level? Rena, this.
Hi, just like the chap there, I sit on an IJB as well for my area. And I would say that ring fencing is definitely very, very important. And it would make a huge change for my area because I can't access SDS or nothing.
Where is it you stay, please?
I stay in North Ayrshire.
North Ayrshire.
But because I sit on the IJB, I see what goes on with the budgets and I know the pressures that my council is under. I know the pressures that my NHS is under. I know everything that goes on under the partnership. So it's a very difficult decision to bring those two things together because there are budgetary constraints on the other side. And you can understand why it does go to other places. But so I think it's a joint thing. It's about ring fencing and also how do you support health and social care partnerships to have budgets that they can actually do the services that they want. It's not just a one or the other. It's a two-pronged question, I feel.
So I think in all of this, and you mentioned budgetary pressures, and we've never seen budgetary pressures like we have in at the moment. And inflation has made that much, much worse. We've lost £1.7 billion basically because of inflationary pressure over the past number of months. And you know, again, I think it was Carolyn that said she's waiting for the UK budget in a few months' time. I'll be honest with you, I'm dreading that budget in a few months' time, and I'm sure many others in the room are. Yes. But I think there's a key thing here in terms of where we're at, because times are tough. And that means that we've got to do things much cleverer. And that means that, you know, we have to shift our focus to prevention rather than dealing with crisis, because crisis costs a lot of money. And there's also the human cost to crisis. So I think we need to box clever around about where we are spending money. And spending money, as Raymond rightly pointed out, on supporting carers is a benefit which leads to a huge amount of prevention. So I think, you know, I note your points from North Ayrshire and Shetland.
On carers, it's something that councils are very aware of. That was part of the meeting we had last week, where it was quite clear across the country the support for a carer strategy. But the message I was to give to the Minister and Government, and both governments, is you need to fully fund this. It needs to be funded properly. Because councils cannot, I mean, it's a tiny amount of our money comes from council tax, the rest comes direct from governments. So our message is quite clear to the UK and the Scottish governments. They understand the financial pressures, but we've been underfunded so much that it's having an impact, as we see, on carers, and we're facing a cost of living crisis and coming out of a pandemic, and it's not an acceptable position. So I welcome this discussion. Actually, it's really important to have it, and obviously you've mentioned as well about making sure we know where that funding goes. I think we're all committed to that.
Raymond, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say something that I think maybe the powers that be there's often an assumption with an unpaid carer that despite how much they're stressed and anxious and on their knees and struggling to cope, the best scenario for them is always to have the cared for at home with them, irrespective of how it's impacting on their well-being. I think we're getting to a scenario now where some carers are starting to think is it best for they have the cared for at home with me just now in a damp, dark, cold house with no healthy diet potentially? Or is the best option for me now as a carer is to ask to put that cared for into full-time care where they'll get heated accommodation, a balanced diet? So it comes back to the prevention as opposed to the reaction. If we put in place support now for carers, particularly over the next 6 months, which are going to be horrendous, then we may be able to stop that from happening in some cases, and certainly I would suggest that would be the cheaper option than carers starting to say, I've had enough, or the best option for me now, as much as it breaks my heart, is my cared for person needs to go into full-time care.
Thanks, Raymond. I'm going to, because Caroline's not had a chance to have a say about the carer strategy, and actually so much of what we've just been talking about I think intersects with what you were saying. How do you feel, and what do you think a carer strategy should deliver?
Well, I spoke in my presentation about my story about being part of the postural care strategy, and as a person with lived experience, and I think obviously you will be, I would imagine you're going to be having people with lived experience feeding into this strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to have those views, and yeah, I think what you were saying about housing, all these really, and also pay structure as well. Pay structure is a massive thing for kids. So for me to continue to care for Freya and work, I need to be able to employ. I'm an employer as well. I have self-directed support staff. I think you need to look at. There's a lot of I don't know if disparity is the right word, is it? Mm-hmm. Between the pay scales for adult carers, social carers, is very different to children's social carers. So, and I don't know if it's to do with councils making up their own rules, but I'm only allowed to pay my staff £9.90 an hour. But adult carers are self-directed, that are employed through self-directed support, are allowed to be paid £10.90 an hour, the real living wage. My staff are facing the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis as well. They're providing intensive care, medical care, just like the NHS staff that they work alongside, but they're still being not valued. I'm their employer, so I feel pretty rotten about that, but I've not got any control over that. So I think there needs to be a pay scale that's across the board, because the people who are doing these jobs are not being paid appropriately, but there's even just adult services and children's services so different. So I think feeding into the strategy, I think all these components and challenges need to be fed in and thought about in housing. I think housing needs to be, that's a massive, because if you're living in the right house,
it makes life much easier.
It makes life, and in the right community setting, you know, there's no point in living up at the top of a hill. If you're a wheelchair user, you know, you might have an appropriate house, but it's not, you know, going to be appropriate for access and community. The ring fencing part, I was quite interested. I wanted to talk about quickly. I don't want to sort of hog, but the carer centre has been really, really helpful towards me over the years. But there's always been a problem with the service that they provide in terms of support for me and Freya. So me and Freya come as a package. I want to go out for a day out with Freya. That's what I want. I want to access the community with Freya. And a lot of the time the carer centre, they'll create a day out for families, but it's not really accessible. So that there's kind of, it's, you know, they don't have, I'm not saying they don't have the expertise, but there's, you know, it's just not going to be, it's never accessible for me and Freya to be part of it. I think ring fencing, I've always asked, why is there not a specific service for families with children with PMLD in Forth Valley? And it's because they've got, I don't know the Health and Social Care Partnership. Oh, we're not allowed. We're only supporting adults. We're not supporting children. But at the end of the day, we come as a package. So it's about that ring fencing part. Well, the Scottish governments are saying they want to support people to be included in society with all these bills and acts and all that. But actually, when it comes to the point, there's not that support. And I've recently, as part of my job, created a accessible event every month for children and their families with PMLD. And from those activity groups, we got funding. We did a pitch and we got funding from a project to do this. I'm working in partnership with Clacks Council. And what's come from these events is that there's a lot of support needed for the families, the carers, that they're just not getting from the services that are already there. So there's a need for it, and especially now with the energy crisis, the cost of living. So ring fencing, I would say, would probably help that situation, would it not? If there was a...
Well, I think there's a couple of things that's come out from this. We've talked about prevention, avoiding crisis, identification, lack of funding, accessing services, inconsistencies. So I guess, can a carer strategy fix that? And if not carer strategy, what does fix it? And where does the National Care Service, as proposed, come in, which is, in a sense, 3 or 4 years away at least? What's the gap? How do we fill that gap? And I'm going to come straight to Kevin, because I know you've got to go in a few minutes, so give you one last chance to talk and pitch for the National Care Service.
So will a carer strategy resolve everything? The answer to that is no. But what we can do is drive forward improvement. But what we are embarking on in terms of National Care Service gives us the opportunity not only to form a new service, but also to look at all of the linkages between services. Because often, I'm quite sure that many folk in the audience will say, it is when there is a change of service that there is a gap in often attention. And I think, again, Carolyn is absolutely right. We need to look at situations around about whole families, not Freya and Carolyn, or Scott or your other kids. We have to look at that as a package. Now, I use these words a lot around about NCS because it is my ambition to move from a position whereby people don't just survive, that they thrive. And in order for that to happen, we have to have a more person-centred approach, or a family-centred approach, in order to get that right. And the most frustrating thing for me in terms of all of the conversations that I've had since getting this job, and that's been thousands of conversations, is that you meet people who are in real crisis and have been often for a long time. And when you hear their story, if the one thing which has normally triggered all of this had been dealt with appropriately at the right time, they would not be in the position that they're now in. So we have to think differently, and this is not just about legislation or regulation. This is also about cultural change. And I know I'm probably speaking too long, Richard, but I really want to make this particular point around about today, because Carolyn talked about trauma and how revisiting can often re-traumatise. And I think that, the investment that we are making in trauma training is important. But it's also ensuring that folk put that into practice when they are dealing with people. Because that does not happen enough as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm so adamant about getting the trauma aspects of this right that ministers are going to be doing trauma training as well. We were supposed to have it a few weeks ago, but it was during the course of the national mourning period after the Queen died, but that will be rescheduled. This is so important as we move forward, that we begin to understand what folk have gone through and treat folk appropriately. Because, what Carolyn has said today, what others have said to me before, it's just entirely unacceptable.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think you have to leave now, so thank you for your time.
Yep.
Yes,
Thank you
don't want to
very
keep
much.
the Deputy First Minister waiting. Thank you so much for your contribution this morning. We'll continue with the panel discussion. Paul, I'll come to you because obviously I know COSLA has some slightly differing views sometimes with the government on the National Care Service, but how do you see either amended or as proposed or working better for carers and just answering some of these problems that we've been talking about?
Absolutely. Just quickly to go back to the point about ring fencing, because I think it's an important point. I mean, it's more actually about basically governments properly funding services, because there is an absolute commitment at local government level. I've not met any councillors, any local councillors, and you'll know from your own experience, they're not utterly frustrated by what's been long-standing cutting of services. And the fact we have so much conversation about councils is because we know how much these services are important to carers. So it's just, please fund them properly so we can pass that on. We shouldn't need ring fencing because there is a commitment there to get behind the carer strategy and carers, and it's so important, as you've highlighted, and I've heard like the Minister, on a regular basis, the impact that these cuts have. In terms of National Care Service, National Care Service sounds like something that we'd all should get behind, but we don't actually. First of all, we don't need a National Care Service to have carers breaks. We don't need a National Care Service for all the things you've mentioned. They should just be getting done. As you've mentioned, that there is an absolute cost of living crisis that is having a massive impact on carers. So this needs action from government right now in terms of both the Scottish and UK government are working alongside councils. We shouldn't have to wait for a National Care Service. And why the National Care Service has seen so much opposition to it amongst so many different bodies and trade unions, etc., is because it really is just a centralisation, a bureaucracy. It's structural. It's actually not going to address the issues that we're facing. These are issues we don't need more bureaucracy, quite frankly. And Carolyn, your story actually about how your journey and you took it into the Health and Social Care Partnership, you influenced it at so many different levels and still are doing that. Part of that is about being able to influence it at a local level. So these systems aren't perfect, but we have them at a local level where we can all feed into them for our local needs, because the needs across the country are different, as we all know. What you'll see with a National Care Service is care boards directly under the control of ministers who can choose who comes on and off these care boards. So you're losing that local angle completely. And when it comes to the cost of it, Audit Scotland, etc., be very clear the costs don't match up. And when we're facing the crises we're facing at local government, national government level, use that money right now, the money it would cost for this bureaucracy, use it to support carers, use it to support councils and others to get on with the job right now. So that's our overview, Richard, in terms of the National Care Service.
Thanks, Paul. And Raymond, I mean, not just the National Care Service, but filling the gap. We talked about the care strategy. Can it do it? Minister says probably not. National Care Service, we don't need to wait, says Paul.
Yeah. I've got a question of what Paul's just said there, that in terms of the Scottish Government funding services more, which I get, but if the existing funding isn't being spent on where it's meant to be getting spent, which is what probably, I don't know, 90% of carer centres would say just now, I'm not sure what difference that would make is the additional funding. The money that's currently given to support carers isn't all getting spent on supporting carers. So, yeah, I'm not sure about that argument.
Well, I'm happy to go back on it. I think the problem is you've got councils who have been underfunded, and it's a fact for over a decade now, who have to make really difficult choices about their own funding, in terms of, so when it comes to carer centres or other voluntary organisations that we're absolutely committed to, we're struggling to meet our own kind of statutory services, and that there is so much ring fencing that already exists from government initiatives, which makes it very hard to put a local angle on how we want to spend our budget. So I think you're absolutely right. There needs to be, what I would like to see actually is an urgency to situation facing carers by both Scottish and UK governments, and local authorities are absolutely committed to working with them right now on these issues.
Right, I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time and we've not had too many opportunities to ask any of our virtual colleagues questions that they have. So, Kate, I don't know if you've got one. Yes. Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, sorry for anyone that didn't hear. There's been a lot of talk on the virtual room about cost of living and financial challenges, and one of the ones that relates to is the ending of social care charges. And obviously that was said, the Minister's gone, it was I think a pledge in the SNP manifesto to end social care charges of all nature. And obviously something I think local government has been doing something towards, but it would be great to know, well actually Paul, you could potentially answer from the COSLA perspective and
So, no, thanks for that, Richard, and I think that's something that COSLA's absolutely committed to delivering on that. Again, it comes back to working with the Scottish Government, which we are. I'm committed to that around the funding for it to make sure it's properly implemented, because the worst thing we can do is when we have comments and strategies and we're committed, people, government and politicians saying they're committed there to carers, but then they're not delivering on that funding. So that is something we're absolutely committed to, and there is ongoing work with the government, and it's really important working with yourselves and all the other organisations that we keep that at the top of the agenda.
I'm just going to give anyone a chance on the floor that's maybe wants to ask a question. Gentleman at the back got there first, and then I think it's Roxana after. So.
Hello, my name's Andrew Muir, and I represent a group of people, group of carers whose relatives have been detained under the Mental Health Act, and we feel we haven't got any rights. And it's a long story, this. I just simply want a meeting with the Minister. He's refused to meet me and our group. Will he meet us? That's just my question.
Well, sadly, the Minister's gone, but I'm sure if you've tried, and I take it you've tried emailing and contacting him in that way.
He's refused to meet me. Will you ask him for me, please?
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we have a coffee at lunch and you can tell me about it and we can see what we can do.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
No problem. Rhonda, question for Roxana.
Hello, my name's Roxana. I have a question. I constantly hear people saying about cutbacks in the social services, lack of funding, etc., etc. I would like to know where the money goes that the government saves from carers. I'm not quite sure what the figure is. Something
10.9 billion a year in Scotland.
Yeah.
That's right, isn't it, Fiona? Thumbs up? Yep,
yeah.
Good.
So if you're saving all that, then why are we just getting £67 something a week? Now, I employ someone to care for my son once a week, and that person walks away with a lot more than I get in a week. Yet he's only looking after my son for a couple of hours, whereas I'm looking after him all the time. Mm-hmm. So, the question is, where does that money go?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think really good question. Raymond is really keen to answer. So
yeah, I think it's a brilliant question. I draw your attention to the State of Caring report that Carers Scotland published yesterday, and on page 5, if everybody doesn't mind, I'm just going to read out a couple of very brief sentences. Carers allowance is currently £69.70 plus the equivalent of £9.45 per week. Carers allowance supplement for carers in Scotland for a minimum of 35 hours each week, worth just £2.26 per hour. For the 40% of carers in state of care in 2022 who care for 90 hours or more each week, this is a miserly 88 pence per hour. How in a caring society is any of that acceptable?
And I think we saw, during the pandemic, the use of self-directed support to employ family members, but that's been inconsistently applied. And I think that potentially is another route to support families to have financial support and care. But it'd be great to have your view, Paul, in terms of actually how do we better support carers financially from a local government perspective. I think the challenges, and it was picked up on the virtual, about the cost of living crisis, and it's only going to get worse. What more can be done?
Absolutely, and I think the key point you've made around that £10.9 billion, and that's why it is so important that we do challenge the governments who do control our taxes and the money we put in, to make sure that is prioritised to carers, because without that impact, without that contribution, where would it leave every sphere of government? The crisis they face now would just be, they wouldn't be able to manage it at all. But my concern is, we're now, it's been evidenced, the cost of living crisis that we're all facing, the absolute impact that's having on carers, and Raymond's highlighted that, quite clearly, and the fact, as you've said, about unpaid carers and what you have to live off, really. This is a crisis that needs to be dealt with right now. There's an immediacy to it, and there's a commitment from COSLA, and we've had meetings as well, Richard, in terms of to take this up as quickly as possible with the Scottish and UK governments. I know they're waiting for budget settlements. I know things are tight. However, carers needs to be an absolute top priority, and there's an urgency to it. So I give you the absolute commitment that every meeting I have with the Scottish Government, I reiterate that, and will continue to reiterate that, and we'll continue to meet Richard and others and make sure these things are picked up, because it's really, really critical that there is forms of funding support. COSLA does work with the Scottish Government on a Fair Work for Social Care group, looking at fair work in terms of, and as Carolyn had mentioned, that discrepancy across how people are paid across social care. We're committed to working towards rectifying that and rights, etc. But again, it comes back to funding. You know, we need to see funding commitments. We can't just say we're in favour of fair work and then actually there's no money to pay for that fair work. That is completely unacceptable, and Raymond's highlighted that what people are actually earning. And so this is something, as I say, I've said it a few times, but this is a crisis that urgently needs to be addressed right now across every sphere of government.
And Carolyn, from your perspective, I think you've obviously raised in the news repeatedly about the cost of medical equipment and that you use. Is there anything you want to sort of add to that?
I mean, for me, I'm working, so I don't qualify for any carers allowance, but I'm still an unpaid carer the rest of the time that I'm not working. And I mean, I'm not going to be able to afford the high energy bills that I've got now. They'll go up to 17,000 a year next year in April. So, you know, if I wasn't working, I'm currently paying £505 a month just now. So if I wasn't working and I was relying on the carers allowance, Freya probably would be in care now because I wouldn't be able to pay it. I wouldn't have the money to pay it. So, and there will come a point that I won't have the money even though I'm working to pay it. You know, I'm managing just now. I mean, I sold my electric bike. You know, that was part of my mental health therapy to keep my, you know. So yeah, there's, yeah. I think there needs to be a lot of work done around the carers allowance, and I'm not sure how that can be done, but there is a lot of money saved, and if we all decided not to care, then we'd certainly have a lot of problems.
Carers don't have the option of striking either.
I always remember, we don't have that option, and I always remember being interviewed by Ian Hamilton during the pandemic, and he said to me, do you think that services just expect you to keep going regardless? And I said, yeah, till I'm, you know, and I think at that point my mental health was starting to deteriorate, but you do just keep going. You're always going to care for your loved one until you can't anymore, so you'll go through what you have to go through. You know, and that's what I feel like we're being taken advantage of. So we need to be valued. It's like I say, we need to be valued, but we need to have support in place from the National Care Service to be able to manage to maybe if we want to go back into work and employment. You know, so it's a bigger picture, isn't it? To enable us to. But I think, you know, some people might not be able to work. In their caring role, but they need to be compensated for that, and they need to feel valued, and I think that's what it is, and that's what I asked when I did my presentation. Scottish Government, can you just please value us?
Yeah, I think sometimes that's one of the most important things is to be valued.
Yeah.
Raymond, I think you had your hand up and you wanted to come in.
I was just very briefly, because I know we've run out of time and probably got other questions, but carers allowance has always been a bit of a mystery to me in that depending on what you read, there's anywhere between 729,000 up to, I've read, 1.1 million unpaid carers now living in Scotland. The last figure I could find was in August 2021, where it said 81.4 thousand people were in receipt of carers allowance. Yeah. Now, even if you take the lowest figure of 729,000, that's just above 10% of people who you would think would be eligible for this don't get it. And that, for me, screams out the eligibility thresholds to access this benefit are ridiculously high. And the hope is, because in fairness, there has been an ongoing and quite a long consultation process going on, because obviously carers allowance next year is going to become a devolved benefit and become carers assistance. And the hope would be that the eligibility thresholds are looked upon, and obviously don't get me started on £69.70 a week. Because that definitely needs to be looked at.
Definitely. Thanks, Raymond. There's a lady at the front who would like to ask a question. Rena, sorry, down the front.
Just a quick question. Why is it we always have to fight in order to get things put in place? I've been a young carer since I was 7, so that is now 10 years. For those 5 years, I was stuck in my house. I couldn't go out with my family because my brother would have meltdown. Because he's got over the sensory needs, my mum was literally screaming from the top of her lungs and nobody would help. Luckily, my gran was a carer for Scottish Autism, so she knew right away that Sean had autism because you can see the tiny little things as y'all know. Why do we always have to fight? Like, I still don't know what I'm entitled to, and that's me like 17. I could be going off to uni, college, or hopefully the Royal Air Force. What am I going to do in order to get things put in place to help my family and for me to get money to help me with what I need to do? So, thanks.
Thank you.
I think, if I can just, I think the problem is that unfortunately there's too many people just assume that you'll be happy to continue in the role that you're in, and therefore they feel that there's not necessarily the need to support you as much. I mean, I've been working in young carers for 16 years now, and it breaks my heart that young carers go through a childhood which has been affected by their caring responsibilities and then are adulthood disadvantaged because they probably haven't reached their educational potential. They haven't got the qualifications that some of their peers that have got who haven't had the same challenges as them growing up. So I absolutely sympathise with, and I ask the same question. Why do we need to keep having to ask the same questions and getting the same answers, but nothing seems to change?
I'm conscious there's a few more hands going up now, and we're running into lunch, but I want to try and bring people in. So, yes, Rhonda's got that lady down the front, and we'll go to the back after.
Just picking up on the point about the struggle to have a meaningful career and keep that career. And this is addressed to Paul particularly. My experience is the number of local authorities who don't have the carer positive mark, and when you look at Carolyn's struggle to get a job, we have unpaid carers in work, but we don't do enough. And there is carer positive examples there to actually support the people to keep them in jobs, because once they're out, we've got a skill gap, but it's a huge cost to re-employ.
I think that's it's a very good point, and it's something that we are, as I said, we're doing this fair work initiatives with the government, but actually getting into work, and as Carolyn pointed out, the difficulty, but then once you're in work, the impact, that needs a lot more work, quite frankly, and that's we can commit to doing that and working with the Scottish Government, UK Government and local government on that, because I think it's a really good point you're making. And going back to your point about why should we constantly have to fight, I mean, that's reflective, isn't it, of the society we're in. It's carers shouldn't have to, young carers and carers should not have to fight so hard and have to do so much on top of it, and it's just not fair, quite frankly. And I'm absolutely committed to doing everything I can with local authorities and through COSLA to try and make that fight easier.
Thanks, Paul. And Sue McClintock, the manager of the Carer Positive scheme, is here today, so you can maybe chat to her at lunch about how we can get the rest of the local authorities Carer Positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Can I just say
sure.
just quickly? Just because I wanted to say about this, when I was transitioning into work from benefits, it was horrific, and that's something that needs to be looked at, because it was just, I was left for about a month or two without any money, and I was trying to speak to DWP about it and all the rest of it, but it was just, it was awful, and it actually made me want to just give up. I came this far, and I thought, I cannot do this. I cannot not have money coming in, and looking after Freya, and so there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done of the transition process of into work, because if you lose your benefits and things don't work out at work, because you're going into the unknown really, and it might not work. It might be really emotionally hard for you to do it, so you might have to go back the way, but you don't have that blanket of support financially, which we all, and especially now with the cost of living, nobody's got any spare reserves. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done around how do you transition through benefits and that kind of stuff.
And I've got to say, that's something
isn't at a local government level, but I agree with you completely. You know, it's a complex benefit system. It's almost made to be complex to make it. You know, and then you've got the concerning language coming. You know, about cuts to benefits with alongside what Raymond's saying about the carers allowance, and it soon will be devolved. But yeah, you know, there's ways to get around this. You know, we were talking about cost of living crisis when energy companies are making the biggest profits they've ever made. So why don't we take some of that to support carers?
Yeah. Could I just ask, Paul, is there a possibility that organisations that are commissioned to deliver services in local authorities, one of the conditions of their future funding is that they work towards becoming a carer positive employer?
I can take that back to COSLA in terms of the local authorities. I need to get their mandate. I represent them, but I think that's certainly a point we can look into, and Richard's also touched on it in terms of the ones that are not carer positive. So thanks, Raymond.
Thanks. Thank you. Right, I'm really pressed for time, but I want to bring in at least one more, two more, promise. Okay.
Hello, I'm Gina Appleton. I'm a parent carer. I've enjoyed, well that's not true obviously, enjoyed the journey of being an official carer for the last 2 years and trying to get social care, you know, some to stay in my home for an hour or two so I can leave and be with my children. Like Carolyn said, I just want to be a mum to my children and my children just want me to be a mum. So my question is, do you think that outsourcing a carer service, so for me that's the service that does the carer assessment plan and then the council decide what you get. So do you think outsourcing that carer service has inadvertently led to carers being kept at arm's length from the council and also created a carer service which is powerless to question that council in the best interests of the carer? For me, the example is understanding that the interests of me as a carer and therefore my well-being relies on my cared for child needs to be assessed in a timely manner and then those assessed needs met. So that's what I'm looking for. More specifically, the carer service provider where I live won't challenge the Children's Social Work Department for the huge delays, and that's what would make my life as a carer much better, and then won't challenge the carers department in the council about the delays on making a decision after the carers assessment's made.
Okay, thank you. Can I have this lady's contribution as well, and then I'll just come back to the panel all in one, and that might make things a bit quicker.
Hello, my name's Patricia Hewitt. I've been caring since I was 18, I'm now 66. We came to Scotland 22 years ago and it was the worst decision we ever made. We lost a little baby on an operating table, heart problems, decided to start again. Not long after we got here, we found out my husband had cardiomyopathy. His heart was working at 7.5%. He was in the care of the transplant team at Glasgow, and 5 years later died of misdiagnosed cancer of the stomach. My eldest son was dead-felled in bed with like a glandular type fever type illness for 2 years. And the youngest two always knew there was something different about the youngest. Eventually they were diagnosed on the autistic spectrum at 17 and 18. What's been missed over the years has been absolutely horrendous. We've just been abandoned. Because I dared to complain, I've been bullied, threatened with slander, fobbed off that many times. Both fit the criteria of pathological demand avoidance. I've petitioned Scottish ministers, and at the end of the day, I've got a young man at home, 26, who was expected to go to Oxford Cambridge St Andrews and spend his life on benefits of virtual recruits. Trying to get any help and support is an absolute nightmare. And it's just... Yesterday, I was just talking to Kath Purdy about this. I've actually got self-directed support from the eldest son, who works at a university in Scotland, to come down and help me with respite. The whole family has been traumatised, and I'm not the only family like this, and it needs looking into it. The lack of understanding of autism is absolutely disgusting. There's no accountability between the local authorities and the Scottish government. And I'm just absolutely sick of it, and people just, fobbing people off. somebody's got to sit round a table seriously and talk about this and move on, because we can't live in the dark ages forever. There's thousands of families out there in the same position as me.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know who wants to try and pick up either of those points first. Raymond, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I guess on the second point first, I guess accountability is a word I keep banging the drum about, because if we can't ring fence the funding, then there needs to be an accountability to show where that funding's getting spent. And at the moment, I think if you continue to do something and get away with it, almost, you'll continue to do it. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think accountability is really important for evidence and where money's gone, where it's meant to go. I guess with regards to the first point, I probably agree as well. The carer centre network across Scotland in the last 2.5 years has probably on average increased the number of unpaid carers registered with us by about 45% across each carer centre. The cases that we're seeing now are more complex because we've had 2.5 years of COVID, so there's anxiety, stress, depression, so they're taking more time to try and resolve. And the truth of the matter is that we've got this kind of perfect storm of more carers wanting to access more of our services because the previous care packages or existing care packages are few and far between, and certainly probably not where they were pre-COVID. And they're wanting to access services through carer centres, and the carer centre network hasn't had anywhere near an increase in resource that would help support this increase in the numbers that we're trying to support just now. So it's very difficult. The situation that I face in Perth and Kinross is not dissimilar to what you've said there. Our carer centre do adult carer support plans, and it's where we identify that there's a duty that they then get forwarded on to the Health and Social Care Partnership in the hope that they'll do something with it. But I can't really disagree with much of what you said.
Paul?
Thanks. I mean, part of the conversation I've been having recently is with across Scotland social workers, and it's almost like become a system that's in crisis, you know, in terms of with you know, the crisis of social care, the things we're aware of, the pressures in the system that Raymond's highlighted, and so it's a really difficult environment for staff to work in, whether they're in councils or whether they're in carer centres, or, you know, it really is. And some, but the specific cases you're mentioning where it's about accountability and making sure that your experience is fed back in to a local authority, you know, that's certainly something that I know councils are committed to, and it's something I'll certainly feed back. And I think the case about specific case, I don't know if you've even went to a local elected member about it to try and get that, because they are there to take your views to local councils, and you might have already done that, but just, you know, that's also an opportunity to feed that back.
Thank you.
I actually gave evidence to QC Webster over the abuse case, you know, the teachers and the boarders, because of the behaviour of Scottish Borders Council. But it goes right the way through. You know, there's no accountability whatsoever, including ministers' behaviour in this, who are reported to the presiding officer. And in the end, I jumped ship to the Lib Dems, who helped me and suggested we petition Parliament. But this has gone on for years. The first time it was discussed, PDA, was 2006 in Parliament. We're still no further forward, and as far as I can tell, the only answer to everything, we'll have another consultation, another consultation, another consultation. Does anything change? No.
Carolyn, do you want to add anything to that in the last couple of points? Or?
I think in terms of the carer centres, sorry, can you just repeat?
It was about the outsourcing of carers plans.
Yeah, the adult carer support plans, I think, I thought about what I was going to say earlier. I had mine done, but I remember speaking to social work about years before getting one done, and she said it was pointless, don't bother doing it. And so that kind of put that in my head, and then when I went to get it done, it was done by the care. I was quite shocked because it was a carer centre person that did it, who I knew, but I just felt like it was just sort of, it should have went, I think I should have maybe done it with somebody who had, and I'm not saying they didn't have the psychological training or you know, but I needed somebody really maybe that had a bit of an idea about mental health and those kind of, you know, that sort of training trauma, and, you know, and I think because that was what mine was all about, you know, and even just an idea about PMLD as well, like living with children with PMLD. So I think, yeah, fair enough, the Carer Centre did it, but I think there maybe could have been a bit more expertise in terms of teasing these issues out of me. I was quite forthcoming because I had to talk about what I'd went through, but I think it's just really, I think I agree with you. It's almost like there's somebody in the middle, so it's like passing the buck. So then it goes to social work, and then you never hear anything. Oh, I did hear something straight away, but I know I've spoke to loads of people who don't hear anything.
Can I ask, do you feel it's added value to you since you've done one?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So it has been worth doing.
Yeah, it was worth doing it for me, but I probably pushed, but I think, yeah, it definitely has changed my life. It's changed my life. So do it, but be honest about how you feel in terms of your life and what the impact of caring is doing to you as a person, and what you want to get out of life, because we all deserve to be able to make choices in our lives and live meaningful lives. Because I have Freya to look after who has severe disabilities, it doesn't mean to say that I should be not having a life myself. And I think, you know, it's sort of do one, and do an adult care support plan, and be honest when you do that. And I always thought, talk about feeling the way I was feeling, it might, you know, they might come and take it away. No, you have to be honest. It's made a massive difference to my life. It's actually helped me move on and heal, because I'm not. When you're stuck somewhere, you're trauma. But when you move on, you're able to kind of leave that trauma behind. It's still there, but it's not as predominant in your life. So I think, yeah, definitely. And I really do feel the lady talking about the service failure. I can empathise with you completely.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Look, I think one thing that's been certain this morning is I can't keep to time, and I'm really conscious that we're going to run out of time to have lunch, and I want to make sure everybody gets plenty of time to get upstairs and have a sandwich before the workshop. So thank you, everyone on the panel, and for staying a bit longer than planned. And thank you to everyone who asked a question. Thank you to the virtual team as well. We're now going to break for lunch, and after lunch it will be workshops sessions for those here in person. For those joining virtually, this is where the Parliament ends. There are ongoing virtual activity for most of this month, including virtual versions of the workshops this afternoon. So if you are online, please sign up to as many virtual workshops as you would like. You should have been given, emailed a list of all of those and how to join. So thank you for joining. Please, again, for both in person and online especially, please fill in the evaluation. This is the first time that we have done this hybrid approach, and we're really keen to hear how it's gone, how it was for you, what we can learn from it, so that we can make sure that when we do these events in the future, they're as good as they can be. If you haven't signed up to a workshop yet and you're here, then you can do so at reception. There are flip charts, and you can sign up to which one you would like to at lunch. The lunch is being held, I think, back upstairs where we were before. The Carer Scotland staff will show you and point you in the right direction. There is, again, just remind people, if you could please appreciate wearing a mask as you move around the building. There should be plenty of seats for everyone to get a seat at lunch as well. I've been asked to say that if you need a taxi after today's event, then please speak to a member of the Carer Scotland staff and make sure you get one. We've not asked people to come back to this main room after the workshop, so this will be the last time we're all together formally today. So I would like to really extend my thanks to everyone for participating in the Parliament today, both in person and online. My thanks to the panellists and to the Minister who's now gone, and especially to Carolyn and to the young carers for sharing your stories and your work. It's hugely appreciated, and it makes this event so much more real to have those powerful stories inform our conversations and discussions. And I want to thank everyone who's a carer who has made the time to be here, both online and in person, because we know how precious that time can be. And so it's hugely appreciated by us that you're here, and I hope that it has been of value. Finally, I would like to thank the staff team at Carers Scotland, in particular Fiona and Rena, who have done so much to put today's event together, as well as the staff from the national carer organisations and those that were on the steering group committee, and the Carers Policy team at Scottish Government, who have all helped make today's event possible and continue to support it. So thank you very much for that. And with no further distractions, please go and have some lunch. Thank you.